So, good morning, everyone, and thank you for that introduction, Jackie. I'm looking very much forward to doing this with you, Stine. This is our last plenary as members of the scientific committee.
Unless we find a way to change the rules and
That's
we can stay
what we
on,
need to look into.
That's for a later meeting. No, we really enjoy it. I hope that's going to be transparent in this session. I mean, ESCAIDE is one of my favorite work events of the year, so to everyone online, I hope the experience online is also good. It's very good here in the room. Now I'm blinded by the light, so I can't see. I can notice, however, that there's not as many people as before, so it must have been a very good night yesterday. I hope people will still come in, because this is a very important session. But thanks to the online hybrid format, you can watch it later. So those of you who are now watching it later because you've been out tonight, I mean, that's going to get a bit complicated. Point is, we're super happy that you're here, and this is going to be a great session.
Indeed. So, post-pandemic public health workforce. We've now been pondering this for some 8-9 months, this topic. And it's been a privilege now that we started to making it open, because we've lots of people have wanted to talk to us about it. So we've been privileged to share many experiences. And me, I'm the head of fellowship program at ECDC. So my main way into the public health workforce is through the fellows. And I must say that it's been pretty obvious to everyone, of course, and very much to me, that we've been through some very challenging times. So fellows, whether you're an EPIET or EPIET or UFEM fellow, it is really a very different experience from where they have been, but challenging nonetheless for everyone. If you're a member state track or a EPIET fellow, being based in a country, you're basically overwhelmed with the pandemic work on top of whatever you should do, and then trying to do your fellowship. Very, very impressive how many have managed through this. EU track fellows being placed in a new country, having to get into a new workplace while maybe not even being allowed to enter the workplace for some time, working alone in an apartment. A very different and stressful situation as well. And then, of course, the supervisors and training sites, fellows who have been working and trying to get contact there, whilst the supervisors are up to very high, trying to manage the situation and having to adapt their way of working to the challenges that they have been coming up. So this has been very obvious. And also this has shown we have more dropouts of fellows from the fellowship than we've ever had before during this time. So this is definitely obvious that there's something we need to address. And I'd like to share with you a story, one of those many stories I've had when I've talked to people about this session, just from yesterday, who told me that, well, during the time of working, I've had to adapt in very many ways. I basically had to split my job in half many times because it was just too much to do. And clearly, now I live a different life afterwards. So basically, now I work not full-time any longer. I'm not leadership positions. I take time for being in the garden and take time with the family. So for me, there's a clear before and after COVID. And I think, to me, that's very much what this session is about. How do we ensure that the before and after is something positive? How do we work as individuals to make sure it's not the other way around? How do we take care of ourselves as individuals? How do we take care of our team members? And how do we, if we are in leadership positions, make sure to safeguard the public health workforce? And how do we work for changing our organizations so that we don't have to meet the same kind of challenges to our well-being as many have been through? So, yeah, with that, I'd like to hand over to you, Stine.
Thank you, Adam. In this session, we're not going to use Slido. I think Slido is a great tool, and it's worked well in some of the other sessions, but in this session, we're not going to use Slido. We're going to do something else, and I'll tell you about it in a minute. I'm trying to find the balance between this is a serious topic, and those of you who know me knows that I like to do funny things and jazz hands and things, but I will try and control this. Let's see how that goes. This session was partly inspired by Barcamp. Some of you will have heard me saying woo, or Florian saying woo when we mentioned Barcamp, and that makes you laugh, or makes some of you annoyed. I apologize for that. But the reason why I do it is because it's such a fantastic event. To me, it's one of the many hearts of Eskeide. So those of you who are online and couldn't make it to Barcamp, we tried to make it hybrid last year. We'll evaluate whether we'll do that next year maybe, but to those of you coming to the next Eskeide or the next one again, do try and come to Barcamp because it's really such a lovely event. You can read on the website, Eskeide website, what it's all about, but it's a participant-driven event where you choose the agenda and everyone can vote for the topics. And last year and this year, one of the topics that got the highest number of votes was, have we been through a trauma? Is that too strong a word to call what the public health workforce went through during the pandemic, and also now after the pandemic? Because as we will also touch upon in the session, the pandemic is over, but many of us are still in a very difficult situation. And when I say us, I'm not necessarily talking about myself, I'm talking about the friends and colleagues who are in the room or who are online, who are working in the national public health institutes or regional local public health institutes, working as epidemiologists in hospitals, clinicians, researchers, public health microbiologists. This is our community. I think sometimes there's also a little bit of a misconception. I've heard it a few times, people saying, but Eskeide, that's just for the EPIETs or the FETPs or the UFEMs or the PIEs. And if you don't know all those acronyms, you can Google them and then you'll find out. But it's, for me, Eskeide is for everyone working in public health. Everyone working with infectious disease epidemiology. This conference brings together outbreak investigations, surveillance. It has everything. Of course, if you work in HIV, it's great to go to the big HIV conference, and ECMID is also great, but they are huge conferences. Eskeide has the size that you can still talk to each other, and talking to each other, making new connections to people that work on something similar in other countries. To me, that is a little bit healing to dealing with the stress and the workload that we have in the everyday. So to me, Eskeide is a place where I come and take fresh air, take new inspiration, and I hope many of you feel the same, because to me it's really special. So, we're not going to do Slido, we're going to do something else. Also, just to tell you, so the structure will be something that's going to happen in a minute, and I'll tell you all about it. It's very exciting. And after that, we have 3 excellent speakers that will be introduced. We can see them too, because 2 of them are online. We're a hybrid conference. Lucy and Kasia, I can see them. You can't see them yet, but they'll be coming on very soon. And we have Giorgio with us in the room, but we'll introduce you to them in a minute. And then what's also been very important to us, now it seems like we are talking a lot, but we have an hour and a half. Maybe not anymore, but we still have over an hour. And it's really important for us that you engage and that we talk to each other. So even though there's no Slido, there's still the app with the comments and the Q&As. As Jackie has been repeating a million times, questions in the Q&A or questions button, comments, just for comments and talking. So if you say, hello, I'm watching from Egypt, that's also great, but that's for the comments, not for the questions. Anyway, please participate in the app or online if you're watching online. I know that people are watching at SSI where I'm working. I'm hoping other institutes are having like small rooms where you can watch the conference together. If you're watching online or if you're in the room, please participate in the chat if you feel like it, or if not, turn off that phone and just be here. And listen to the messages that we're going to give. And we're going to start this session in a bit of an unusual way, an unplanned way. Not everybody knows it. It's been Adam and I who've been planning it. And it's a little bit inspired by Barcamp. So we have 3 people in the audience that we have talked to before and that are going to share a 2-minute story. And would like to start with our first speaker to stand up and introduce himself and give his story.
I'm Vladimír Prikazky from the Czech Republic. For many years I worked in National Institute of Public Health as well as during pandemic period. So I have experiences that exceed 2 minutes text message. But experiences from pandemic are that already before pandemic there was a depletion in epidemiology staff in our country, and pandemic hit it very much with overload and exhaustion. So many people then left, some of them because they retired, so population is quite old relatively, and some of them because they were exhausted, burned out, so they left the system. And a similar situation we experience also our IC, because I come from Slovakia. I see it in Slovakia, we see it in Bulgaria, we have some friends there, and also in other countries in Central and Eastern Europe. So we also discussed the issue with a couple of colleagues, and one of the conclusions is that we need support and even pressure from European Commission and as well from ECDC to rebuild appropriate capacities in line with competencies that are kind of standard for European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
We're just going to continue and take our second testimony. I'm not going to do any further introductions or comment, but let our second speaker speak for herself.
Hello everyone, so I'm Georgia Labrie. I'm currently working with the UK Health Security Agency, and I trained with EPIET in 2010. And I wanted to raise the issue of habituated hypervigilance, which I think we're seeing not only in my agency, but from talking to everyone here in the last couple of days, seems to be a thing for all of us. So we seem to be stuck post-emergency in this very reactive way of working. There's now this embedded culture of immediacy. Even if things aren't urgent, you feel that you have to reply right now. When I was training, it was kind of hammered home to us that whatever we did in order to. We're doing X in order to do Y. And in order to seems to have been replaced by just in case. So we have a tendency of working to do things just in case because we're worried about missing things, even if they're likely to be of very little public health importance. And all of this leads to very long hours and very packed schedules, even though we're now at a time where COVID's changed everything, and we need to do a lot of developmental work to think about how we restructure in this post-pandemic land. And that kind of creative thinking needs space and thought. But unfortunately, because we're working so reactively, there's very little time to do this. So my thoughts are, how do we wind this down? There's still a lot of scrutiny on our senior leaders, on all of us, from the media, from the politicians. Our senior leaders still have necks on the line. There's junior people who've joined since the pandemic who I worry think this is a normal way of working. And I worry for the future of the profession, and also just that it's no way to live for any of us.
Keep on. Okay, sorry. No, I have a...
You speak, just speak.
Okay, I can speak. Can we make sure, because people watching online can see the people standing up.
Yes, they can.
But people in the room, could they see them on the big screen?
I don't think we can do that at
Okay.
short notice. So people can see them perfectly well
You just have
standing
to
in the
look here.
audience. Over to you.
Thanks very much. My name is Emily MacDonald. I'm from the Norwegian Institute of Public Health, and I was in cohort 2012 of EPIET. I'll continue the uplifting messages with a bit of experience from Norway. Actually, I look fondly back on the pandemic as a period of real solidarity in the staff. We were working together with one common goal. We had a lot of new staff come in. We had very little turnover in long-term staff during that period. And then the pandemic ended, which is great. That's a good thing. But as of February 2022, all of the mandatory control measures were done in Norway, and we're moving into this period of normalization. This also leads to normalization of resources and staffing as well. From the transition from the end of 2022 to 2023, for example, my unit went from 21 people to 6 people because all of the finances associated with the pandemic were done with the pandemic. In addition, we start seeing more of this turnover of long-term staff that have stuck it out but are now ready for something else. Right after that, the government decides to do a reorganization of the central health agencies, which I think is something, again, we're a bit ahead of the curve on several of these things, but this is something that other countries will experience. So we lead into another period of uncertainty. So how do we find what our common goals are now, and where are we going? I think that's the question that a lot of us are asking. What now? What happens now? Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Excellent.
Stine, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I hope you found these testimonials inspirational. Feel free to discuss them in the comment box. We're trying out a bit, we don't want this guide to be too stiff, and so that's why we're trying something new. But and actually, I've heard also some come and say that you kind of miss being able to put up your hand and ask a question. Jackie is maybe going to be mad at me, but maybe later on in the discussion we can try and see how that works if there's somebody who puts up their hand and asks.
Fine, the choice is yours. However, because we have people online who can't raise their hands, what we've been trying to do is privilege people who've written their questions to get that mix, and then if there's time, also throw out into the room.
That makes good sense. Great, but we have, in addition to these 3 a bit spontaneous but still planned interventions, we have 3 great speakers in this session, and I would like to welcome them on board now. So if you can put our 2 lovely experts who are with us online on the screen so that everyone can see them. Here they are. And if I can ask Giorgio, who's in the audience physically. Yes, we can see you waving. That's excellent. Giorgio, please come and join us on stage as well. We'll introduce each of them. Of course, you can read their bios on the webpage. But we'll introduce you all probably just before you speak. And I have the privilege to introduce Lucy. And Lucy, I had your book with me, but they told me to leave my bag in the back. I was going to say, Lucy can't be here, but I have her book with me on stage. But those of you who want to see a copy, you can contact me afterwards. Lucy is a UK expert and advisor on emergency planning and disaster recovery. She's a professor in practice of risk and hazard at the University of Durham and co-founder of the After Disaster Network at the university. She's also a professor in mass fatalities and pandemics at the Center for Death and Society at the University of Bath. Lucy has written several books. The one I'm referring to is called When the Dust Settles. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lucy. And she's participated in lots of podcasts and articles. So if you like what Lucy is going to say, she's going to talk to us without slides. If you like what Lucy has to say, we've made sure that someone from the crew is going to post in the comments section a link to the website. Is it called Whatever Next, Lucy? Yes. Without much further ado, I'm going to give Lucy her 10 minutes. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you. It's a very, very real privilege to be here. Thank you very much. Everybody okay with the sound? I'm just going to talk. Okay, so I'm a very, very proud emergency planner. And that means that we plan, we're a hidden field, a hidden profession that plans for lots of things. And as you could hear from my job title, that includes a pandemic. And as you could also tell from my introduction, I'm about to rock your world. So what that means is afterwards, you're going to want to find out about what I said. And so as Stine said, please do visit Whatever Next, which is my website. We've got a special edition for the Royal Society of Public Health, specifically on the next time, the next pandemic. I'm very proud of When the Dust Settles, which is a very kind of personal insight into the things that I'm going to talk about. And in fact, for Vladimir, who just talked in the insights, here is my Slovakian version of When the Dust Settles. We've got a number of foreign translations in development. And I X at Lucy Gobag and also Blue Sky, and I Insta at When the Dust Settles. And the reason I say all that is because, as I say, what I'm about to say will come as a bit of a shock, and you're going to want to read about it afterwards. Again, you'll have noticed from my biography that this can be quite an unusual experience compared to yours. There are very few surprises for me as a pandemic planner. Whereas many people are struggling with this aftermath and trying to make sense of it. And certainly in the UK, we perpetuated the idea that this was a complete surprise, and that both the pandemic and its aftermath caught us by surprise. But I think what it's very important to understand is we planned for pandemic. And also, if you're a good disaster planner, and I like to think I am, we knew what it would do to the workforce. Across the world, but particularly in the UK, we planned for a public health-led response. We planned for a resource response. We knew a lot. We looked into history. And certainly if you were me, you planned for a people-centered response. And what I mean by that is you planned for something that would consider the afterwards. And that's what I'm all about. That's what When the Dust Settles is about. That's why it's called what it is. You find me in two places as an emergency planner. Obviously, I worked with colleagues before. We make lots of lists about things that could go wrong. But you also find my particular niche thinking about how we come back from these things. My earlier book is called The Recovery Myth, an apposite title, which problematizes the idea that these things ever are come backable from. We don't recover. We process something with what I call survivance. We come through things with humor, with brief moments of joy, but with an awful lot of difficulty as well. Emergency planning is a cycle. So we look at things that have happened, we plan for them, we learn from the ones that happen, and we go again. The other thing that I think some people find quite confronting in emergency planning is we practice what is called isomorphism. I do not need the disaster to be the same to learn from it in a different way. Sometimes that was that we would apply other diseases to our pandemic planning. So particularly for me, what was very relevant actually was 2014, 2015 Ebola planning. But sometimes it's not disease planning at all that will inform me how a workforce will respond afterwards. Every disaster I've ever seen, and I've responded personally to over 100 and reviewed over 1,000, whatever the type of disaster, we see a toll on workforce. One of the things that was very difficult for me in the early stages of the pandemic was to gain acceptance for the D word. People did not want to call it a disaster. We are sometimes asked, it was posed in the framing of this discussion, does this kind of event come with trauma? This is a disaster worthy of a substantial chapter in the global history books. Of course, it should come with the respect that it deserves and a full understanding of trauma, not just to frontline responders, but to us all. And there is a line in When the Dust Settles that says we are all disaster survivors now. And that is one of the lines that I've had most discussion at book festivals and theatre events and conferences about. One of the things I want you to download, if you're going to get through this next stage at all, is the New Zealand guidance, which will be put in the comments for you, but is also on my website. And that's called Leading in Disaster Recovery, a Companion Through the Chaos. It is not designed for political leaders. It is designed for healthcare workers and scientists and anybody who holds a lantern for its community. Anybody who says, follow me, will get you ready, will take you through. I need you to turn to page 6 in that and to the recovery graph. The third speaker speaking before mentioned the early honeymoon heroic phase. But when you work in disaster planning, you know that is a siren's call. It doesn't last. It rapidly slumps to fatigue and exhaustion and dissent and questions in your leadership that leaves a health workforce with a very specific moral injury. They gave everything and they feel failed. So then what we see the workforce do is two things. They either see the great exodus, they go pop, they don't want to do it anymore, they leave. Or if we're really careful and we really think about how to do it, we can see the great epiphany. I think all three actually of the speakers before raised the kind of ways we might want to cultivate an idea of the great epiphany, ideas of perhaps recognizing that the world has changed. There is a before and an after. One of the words that gets a particularly emotional reaction in the book is the word hiraeth, a Welsh word for the loss of the life before, a world for which there is no return to. More of your seasoned practitioners will be feeling hiraeth in the workplace. The workplace that existed before 2019 is gone. One of the groups of colleagues we have to particularly look out for is, as Georgia said, our newly qualified workforce. They are now used to perma-crisis and a state that we call heightened arousal, exactly as Georgia called the hypervigilance. They assume this is how we're going to be for now on, and certainly we will be for many years to come, but it changes the way that they train and it changes the way that they see the profession. The New Zealand guidance I'd used for several disasters before the pandemic, and what feels like paper on a page had become transformative, and that gave me the confidence to know that that was the sort of thing to get us through. It's written by the Red Cross in New Zealand, but with 100 years of disaster recovery guidance distilled into one document for workers who have to go again. It talks about the value of leadership, which I'm sure we'll come to in the Q&A. It talks to the value of the wild card, the challenging thinker, a role that I'm quite happy to adopt in myself. It talks to the need to be technically informed as to what disaster recovery is. It's not acceptable to not understand what disasters do to a workforce if you're in a management role. It's opening up a whole world of information for you. Most importantly, one of the lessons that a life in disaster has taught me is that in order to heal, we have to say what this is and what it did to us. We have to stop trying to declare it over, and we have to stop trying to pretend that the other one, the next one, isn't right around the corner. One of the things you learn to do when you see how fragile and strange life is you learn to work out where you're going to get your optimism from. You learn to work out where you're going to get your joy from. And one of the greatest things for me is understanding the collaborations that have come out of this. We see it in a form of kind of post-traumatic growth. And there's no question, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it, that disaster scientists are becoming much more mainstream. We're very, very tight colleagues with our public health and disease epidemiology colleagues more than we've ever been. And of course, also with our climate scientists. So sometimes I allow myself to feel the excitement ahead. In my job title, you heard that I have 2 professorships, and one of them at Bath is in mass fatalities and pandemics. We've tried to make the pandemic different from other disasters. But in this pandemic, in this disaster, I've seen the same amount of ambiguous loss and of bereavement. And what I think people find particularly confronting is people try and catch me out and they say, did you expect that? Of course we did. And in the exercises that we did prior to 2019, one of the questions that I was asked by the Government Office for Science here in the UK is, tell us about the 3 to 5 year point after the pandemic. And I wrote a picture of how difficult and depressing that would be for the workforce. And one of the realizations I made that is in order for governments to function and labs to continue to work and future diseases to still be found, we'd need to power through. We'd need to keep going. And one of the greatest tests in disaster recovery, in all disaster recoveries that I ever see, is how to get that balance between keeping going, protecting yourself, protecting your colleagues, and honouring what we've been through. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. That was really, really nice. In the interest of time, as I don't see any burning questions for Lucy in the chat yet, if you have any, feel free to put them in the questions tab. I think we're going to move straight on to Kasia, and then we'd have time, make sure we have time, do you agree, for questions in the discussion. So I'm going to let Adam introduce Kasia.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to do so. Kasia, or Katarzyna Czabanowska, to say the whole name. I'll do that since I'm now going to give you the formal introduction. So Professor Katarzyna is a Professor of Public Health Leadership and Workforce Development and Head of the Department of International Health, Care and Public Health Research Institute, CAPRI, at Maastricht University in the Netherlands. And her research involves leadership development, leadership competencies for public health and health-related disciplines, capacity building in public health. And there are many more titles and things, but I think we'd rather hear you talk. So but just to say, amongst other achievements, she's also a lead author of the WHO Ask for Competency Framework and the Roadmap to Professionalizing the Public Health Workforce in the European region, which is, I think, very important to say. So, Kasia, with that, I'm looking very much forward to hear you take a bit of another perspective on the leadership skills and techniques and what we need to work on in order to face this challenge. So over to you, Kasia.
Thank you, Adam. Good morning, colleagues. I'm really delighted that I can participate in this conference with you, although I wish I were there in person, but currently I'm in Bordeaux at the Public Health Leadership Academy, and there are a lot of colleagues like you from the Institutes of Public Health that try to acquire or try to discuss what it takes to be a public health leader. So I heard the first stories, and I think that what I will be sharing with you will resonate with some of the things that we heard from the cases. And first, I would like to pose a question so that we can all think together, how can health leaders best support the post-pandemic public health workforce? So what can they do that we really feel protected and that we have the skills that are needed to deal with disasters? I structured this presentation about a few considerations. And the background, as you can see, was chosen on purpose because we always have to go to a different future and cross the chasm to something that maybe will be better. So I will mention something about around the context and challenges of the public health workforce, then emerging competencies. And I think that we've already heard in the speeches some of the competencies that are needed and that they emerged. Then supporting organizational environment. So what organizations and leaders can do to support the public health workforce. And I will be happy to answer some questions from you. So I would say that working differently means also learning and leading differently. And this is something that you have experienced when pandemic struck. So that was a feeling of sudden and radical change and isolation, which was already mentioned by you, and immediate shift to distance and online, remote work in these restricted workplaces for a long period of time, and a very big push toward digitalization. It all required some new qualities and adaptability and flexibility and very clear communication. At the same time, our leaders or managers were wondering what to do, how to manage colleagues that, in spite of these limitations, they still stay motivated and deliver. And that seemed to be one of the skills that was needed when people were all over the place in different remote areas. So how to keep everybody engaged and motivated. But at the same time, there were big challenges, and as we hear, so there was exhaustion of public health workforce. People were leaving due to retirement or attrition or this terrible exhaustion. And they had to deal with different coping strategies. And as we know, the COVID response was extremely polarized. And that led to burnout and strain in the workforce. And we also observed a lower political interest in public health as compared to medical professions. And of course, something that we all know, poor recognition, poor support of public health, that public health workers are chronically underfunded, low salaries, very often undefined career paths. So that leads to diminishing interest in public health profession. And as somebody said, there was a department of 26, and after the pandemic, only 6 people, because the funding was also cut. When we got some hours and money for managing pandemic, when it was over, everything went back to normal, seemingly. And there is one more thing that I would like to add, apart from all these challenges. There was something like moral courage and the consequences of moral courage that we could observe in many public health professionals and frontline workers, and also those like you who dealt with the crisis. And what does it mean to have moral courage, having the strength to do the right thing when there is a cost? I'm sure that you can find examples of colleagues and maybe yourselves that you had to act and to do something that is right. And then there were consequences, loss of trust, maybe some difficulties concerning work, or maybe even attacks that were directed towards public health workforce. But yes, we lived through this, and we have to acknowledge that courage is one of the strengths of the public health professional. So what happened? Some of you said we need competencies, and we need to have a set of competencies that will allow us to address the change and to address crisis. And there is the competency framework, WHO competency framework, that is quite comprehensive and really includes the set of competencies that are needed for public health professionals, also on different levels of practice, starting with competent, then more advanced and expert. But we have done a study, some kind of a stress test for the competences needed for the public health workforce. And it turned out that there are several critical competency areas in relation to public health emergencies. And this is flexibility and motivation to act, as well as very clear communication. And not only communication with the staff, but communication with the public, communication with the media, so that everybody is informed and that the proper language is chosen. And then we observed a need for a very special blend of research, analytical skills, epidemiology, but combined with ethics, empathy, and sensitivity to diversity. Lucy mentioned New Zealand, and I would like to mention Jacinda, the Prime Minister, because at that time there were a lot of articles in the media that Jacinda combined these two so well. That's why she was successful in coping with the pandemic. And then preparedness and response on different levels, local, global. And what turned out to be extremely important was adaptability and leadership skills. And again, I think that was Vladimir or someone else said at the beginning that after the pandemic, people changed the way they live. So they go more for life and work balance. Maybe they can have one day off, so totally disconnect. This is also related with the levels of leadership. And the first level is always leading self. What do we stand for? What we believe in? What values we represent? And what do we want the outside world to see in us? So the first thing to do is to lead self, and then moving to leading other people and more interpersonal leadership. So these are the skills, these are the competences that seemed to be extremely important to be developed. I would like to share with you the competency framework, although it is the leadership competency framework for nursing, but we developed this framework post-pandemic. So with colleagues from all over the world, we looked at the skills and competencies that are needed for leaders. And as you can see, strategy in leading self and others, communication, collaboration, transformative change, governance, evidence-based decision-making, professional ethics. But what I find extremely interesting here in this framework is that we look at these things through the lenses. And this is diversity and inclusion. And you remember I said that pandemic showed that we need to have this blend of scientific, evidence-based decision-making or just science with empathy for diversity, political savvy, and of course, systems thinking. Everything is a big system, interconnected system. And pandemic has shown that if something happens in one area, one sector, it has repercussions or is connected with all other things. And it is important to foresee what can happen and what can be the effect of decisions that we are making on other parts of the system. So how the organizations can help the staff? What is the supporting environment? So it is extremely important that public health leaders create the environment where we can support, mentor, and nurture colleagues, where they can find more senior colleagues or those with whom they can walk the talk, that they can develop themselves better, that they can identify areas that they can grow, that they can develop their personal development plan. So support in special education and training paths for people, the ones that are needed. And I would say introduction of some kind of rewards and recognition for colleagues, that there is space for everyone's talent. And you know that we are all different and we want to excel in different areas. And the organization should recognize that and award the area in which we are good. So building on the strengths and best competencies on colleagues. And sometimes it happens that we have to do everything and we are exhausted. There are things that we naturally can do because they are easier for us and things which we cannot. So rewards and recognition, encouraging bottom-up, inclusive discussion with colleagues, and above all, a new type of leadership, which is called compassionate leadership. Because compassionate leaders are not weak. Compassionate leaders captivate hearts and deliver results. There are two books that I can recommend to you. One by Michael West, and that is Compassionate Leadership in Health and Healthcare Sector. Or another one, Bottom Line, is Compassionate Leadership, that has been written not by a healthcare professional. But what is this compassionate leadership? It consists of 4 stages, and it really makes a difference if in the organization you try to introduce this type of communication or leading colleagues. So first, paying attention to another person, to the problems that this person may have. Then trying to understand what is really going on. Then responding in an empathic way, understanding the emotions, yes, with emotional intelligence, and then helping. And helping does not mean that we have to be overburdened with problems, but helping in a way that through listening, we try to help our colleagues to find solutions themselves, and that they feel that they are accepted, they are listened to, and that the environment is with them. So compassionate leadership can be something that we can try to exercise. And leadership is just like living in a paradox. You remember I talked about moral courage. So on one hand, we need to be strong, and on other hand, we can be vulnerable. So it is a constant living in a paradox. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kasia, for that very inspirational talk. And we don't have any questions of clarification, so in the interest of time, I think we'll move on, and then we will take the discussion in the plenary afterwards. So thank you very much.
I think there was one point from Florian about the link to the document, what's it called, the QR code that was shared doesn't work. So I don't know if Kasia, if you can see the chat, if you can share the correct link, or otherwise we'll try to fix it later. So,
okay, so the link to the document.
Yes.
Anyways, with that then, I'd like to introduce Giorgio Grossi, and you're very welcome here, and we're really glad to have you in the room.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And just to say then briefly that you're a behavioral scientist and associate professor in medical psychology with a degree from the Department of Psychology of Stockholm University, with a background as a teacher, and has conducted doctoral thesis on stress among unemployed. And in year 2000, you started working on the Stress Clinic project at the Institute for Psychosocial Medicine. And you're a psychotherapist and would specialize in cognitive behavioral therapy in Uppsala at the Karolinska University. And you've also authored several books. And you're also now has recently established a virtual stress clinic.
That's true.
And we're really, really happy to have you sharing some of your experience of working throughout the pandemic and much longer than that. So over to you.
Thank you very much. And again, good morning. I'm Giorgio. I'm not the one who sings. That's Georgia with an A in the end, and she's around somewhere. As Adam said, I work as a psychotherapist, mainly these days, actually. And one of the reasons I'm here is because during the pandemic, I had the honor to do some counseling for the ECDC staff in Stockholm. I gave lectures about stress and stress management. I gave some one-on-one therapy sessions to those who needed that, and others needed to come to our clinic. You see there's stressmottagningen written down on the lower right portion of the slide. That's the clinic where I used to work at and which I run virtually these days. So besides that, I attended the excellent bar camp last night, and I'm really happy I did that because it was a different experience, and it was very entertaining, very informative, at the same time kind of chilling, because it's really saddening to hear that you guys in this room and outside who have been struggling so hard for such a long time with so much stress continue working in a state of hyperarousal, because that's not really what's going to solve the burnout issue in the aftermath of the pandemic. And the word burnout was the most frequently used last night, at least in the last part of the bar camp. So what we're going to do today is dwell a little bit on burnout and the clinical aspect of it. And I want you as individuals, but also as leaders, managers, to be aware of the fact that, even more aware of the fact that although the pandemic is over, fact is that once burnout is in place, it won't go away by itself. Okay, so we need to make some radical changes in the environment in which we act. So just to clarify a few things, the word burnout is used in various contexts. It's a slang word in many subcultures. It's also a phenomenon studied within work psychology, and it has a long tradition with authors such as Herbert Freudenberger, Christina Maslach, and others. And what it has to do with is, what it is really, it's a syndrome of emotional exhaustion, increasing cynicism, and decreased professional fulfillment seen in a number of occupations, but maybe mainly in people doing people work. And the bulk, the great majority of studies conducted within this field has been conducted on people who don't feel well at all, but they're still at work. So in that respect, they are still healthy. So what about clinical burnout? Well, that's something completely different. It's not even a diagnosis in most parts of the world. But in Sweden, we have one, and it's very much debated. Some people will say that it's not for real. Some people will say it's old wine in new bottles. And some people will say that it's just a medicalization of everyday phenomena. But I'll describe it for you, and you'll be the judges of whether it's real or not. So exhaustion disorder, which would be the equivalent of clinical burnout, is something that is caused naturally, obviously, by long-standing stress without restitution for a period of at least 6 months. And the patients I'm used to meet in the clinic are those who have been exposed to a massive stress for years usually, and are really depleted when it comes to energetic resources. But the main symptoms, the cardinal symptoms, are the ones that you have in front of you. That is a severe severe fatigue and lack of energy, which is not the normal fatigue, tiredness we can all experience from time to time, and which responds to rest. But this is really something extremely deep, and no matter how much you try and tell yourself to get up of the bed and start doing things, get active, your body will probably not respond to that. One of the most characteristic aspects of fatigue, because fatigue is a multi-dimensional concept, is the mental aspect of it. That is the cognitive weariness, the severe cognitive impairments, that is impairments in memory and concentration, which are reported by the patients. And this is something that is quite of a handicap. due to the fact that the majority of our works, our jobs today are not of a physical nature, but we use the brains in order to, get the job done and also function in society. And when you, on a daily basis, are confronted with, a number of memory and attention-related failures, and you aren't able to rely on yourself anymore and start writing notes and remember this and remember that, and you're forced to check and double check that you have done things right, it becomes really a stressor in itself. And then the third group of symptoms is the increased sensitivity to stress. That is, once you have developed a state of clinical burnout, parts of the brain are affected in the sense that what we call stress sensitivity is heightened due to an increased sensitivity in the limbic system. So at least one study has shown, for instance, an enlargement in the amygdala, both on the right and the left side, in patients with exhaustion disorder compared to healthy controls. And that's something that speaks for the increased proneness to arousal in situations where the individual usually does not react that intensely. And probably you have all experienced the fact that when you have become triggered emotionally, you're in a state of anxiety, it becomes even more difficult to focus and, get access to the prefrontal cortex. So memory and concentration are further decreased. So these are the main symptoms, and then you have at least 3 of the following most days of the week for a period of at least 1 month. And you see sleep disturbances, generally insomnia, but also hypersomnia or a combination. The fatigue and fatigability does not only affect the brain, memory, concentration, emotions as such, but also the physical body. And we have an excessive sensitivity to normal stimulations, normally sensory input, and an increased sensitivity to sound is typical in exhaustion disorder. And then a number of physical symptoms. Stress is a phenomenon that affects the entire body, so you may develop aches, pains, bodily symptoms from the GI tract or heart palpitations, etc. Now, there are some characteristic phases in the development of this disorder, and the line that you see here, you could see as a representation of your vitality, the energy levels that you dispose of on an everyday basis. And on the left-hand side, you can see an individual that runs fast, and her energy goes up and down, but she has enough to deal with everyday chores, work and family, etc., etc. But then we enter a period of prolonged stress without restitution. See the pandemic, for instance, where we enter this risk phase. And that's the phase during which all the symptoms I was mentioning start coming, at a slow pace. You become agitated, you have a lot to do, you have too much on your plate, and you work faster, you do many things at the same time, and you stop sleeping properly, you become very preoccupied with problems, you worry a lot, you're up in your head, etc. And you also stop acting on the activities that are actually usually give you some kind of recovery. Okay, you don't have time to spend working out or being with friends or just chilling, etc. So all recovery is removed from the scene and the stressors accumulate. And you soldier on, but then at a certain point you reach a breakdown, and that's where the acute phase ensues, where the level of exhaustion is tremendous, and you need to go to the doctor, you can't go to work, You have to undergo tests, etc., to see that there is not something else, somatic or psychiatric, that is at the base of the symptoms, and then usually you end up on sick leave for a prolonged period of time, generally, if it's a tough exhaustion episode that you have entered. And then you see you have the recovery phase, and that's interesting because it goes up and down, and you see there's a great risk of relapses. Why is that, and why does it take such a long time to recover? Most of my patients are very preoccupied with the question of time, and the constant question that comes is, how long will it take before I'm myself again, before all the symptoms have gone, before I can act as usual again? And actually that's not really happening in many, many cases. Why is that? Because there's a number of stressors that act as risk factors for hitting the wall, as we say in Swedish. That's a metaphor for, entering the acute phase of the exhaustion disorders. But then many of those stressors will remain present in your life and function as maintenance factors. And other mechanisms will also ensue that will prolong, maintain the burnout syndrome over time. And that's why remaining in a workplace characterized by hyperarousal is not something that will lead to you unwinding and recovery properly. So let's take a look at these maintenance factors and see what's on the next slide. So, for instance, we have the life puzzle and being a woman that actually are risk factors. The majority of those who develop a severe exhaustion disorder are women. At our clinic, we had a population of patients where 75%, 80% are women and the rest men, and this is representative in general. Why? There's a whole set of factors explaining the gender differences, and one is the gender-segregated labor market, and also the fact that women are socialized to take more responsibility for family, home, etc., the stuff outside of work, while working at perfection. Okay? What have we? We have the boom and bust cycle. That is, once you have the clinical burnout issue, it's not like you have the same levels of exhaustion all the time. It goes up and down. So you have your days when you feel better, and those days you may even feel normal, okay? So your mind goes, yay, I'm back in business. So let's take the opportunity and do things now, okay? So the consequence of that is an overexertion, and then there's a worsening of symptoms, there's a lot of passivity, there's a lot of isolation, brooding, being up in one's mind, and then after a few days, again, yay, let's go. And if we don't break that cycle in the rehabilitation, it will take ages. Am I talking too much?
The green clock?
Yeah, I have 3 seconds. So, okay, I stopped myself there.
We just want to make sure that there's time enough for discussion. I think you're all bringing up so many interesting topics, and there's lots of good questions. So we want to have time for discussion.
Okay. Can I have just one more minute? I finish this? Yeah, it's so funny. It's so interesting. I can feel your energy out there. So we have lack of acceptance. If you won't see truth as it is and actually acknowledge the fact that you have a condition called clinical burnout, you will not do what you need to do in order to alleviate it. And why could that be the case? Well, because many are afflicted by guilt and shame, and they don't want to acknowledge that they are weak people. And if you act upon your guilt and shame, you will probably do a lot of things that are counterproductive. We don't have time to expand on that, so you catch me later, okay, at the coffee break. This is our humanly unique way of creating stress when there is no external stress. So ruminations, worry, and self-criticism. I'm aware of the excessive E there, so I become self-critical myself right now. But dealing with this persistent negative thinking is actually something that creates a lot of stress. So
I don't want to
Great.
stress you out, but we really want to have time for discussion.
So let's do that. Thank you.
Welcome.
Sorry, Giorgio.
No problem.
And I recognize there was, I'm sure, several people in the room who would love to hear your points. Giorgio is here. Those of you who are around, please feel free to catch him. I can see on the clock we have 18 minutes, and there's a lot of questions. Can we bring back also our 2 online speakers? Perfect, you're here on the screen. That's where we want you, if possible. Now you're gone. Now you're back. I will start with, there's a lot of questions, and I'm also going to later bring up Jackie, but I'll take the first one. There were 2 questions that were a bit similar that has gotten a lot of votes in the app. Vivian Bremer from the Robert Koch Institute says, "Thank you for the talk, Lucy. That shook me up. How can we make policymakers understand the situation of public health workforce and the trauma that persists?" And I think that's in line with what Harold from France is asking. How can we deal with the hyper-vigilant decision makers that are still in crisis mode and expect from EPI and public health professionals to be as reactive as during the pandemic, but with dwindling means and resources? Also linking a bit to what Emily was talking about, that there are several institutes that have to fire people now. Lucy, would you want to start? And the 2 other speakers, feel free to, but let's start with Lucy.
Thank you. Not to be pessimistic straight away, but in some ways you can't. That's the summary answer of all of that. And actually, that's sometimes the beauty of some of the disaster recovery advice is it's about realizing what's possible. So there's a lot of expectation from disaster survivors to try and drag politicians and leaders with them. And something like the New Zealand Recovery Guidance reminds you that you are never going to do that. But there's a peace that you find in reading some of these things. And similarly, I think it fits with the idea that next time will be more organised or more ordered. We call that fantasy planning. Some of this is quite spiritual and quite theological. It's the acceptance of living a different reality to leaders in the aftermath. The other thing I think, and I was very, very influenced by the last speaker there as well. It's always good to check in on what things like hyperarousal and burnout feel like. There's a very physical requirement now to kind of slow things down. There's some very brave leadership required. We're getting in our field constantly. We live in what we call kind of perma-crisis. We constantly activate. My WhatsApp was going on all through the night. And to actually try and filter when to do things and when not, and the price and the cost that would come from being too slow is very high. I see this phase often lasting for some time, and my worry is that we haven't got, certainly in the UK, to a position where we are filtering what we need to react to. So we're going to stay like that for a while. And what I do, I'm an emergency planner, so I respond to things all the time, is you have to manage your psychological and physical responses exactly as Giorgio said. You have to look at your own strategies for that. So that's not allowing your adrenaline to respond. When things come in, I actually, my most important phrase, a very British phrase, is put the kettle on, have a cup of tea to decide what this is that's come across your desk. A very operational response to a very strategic question.
Excellent response. I don't know, Kasia, do you want to add anything to what Lucy said?
Yes, while Lucy was speaking, I was thinking, what can I add to this? Usually we want to act quite quickly to inform the politicians, but we sometimes think we need to wait for the window of opportunity, that the things we want to talk about, workforce, stress of the workforce, can really be on the agenda of the politicians. But what we can do sometimes is to advocate and to show a human face that the politicians can't disregard any longer. So showing through contacts with friendly health journalists, a human being that suffers. So the face. And while we show data and numbers, and sometimes we see nothing happens, they can't disregard, or at least they feel uneasy when we show a person. So this is a comment.
Perfect, Kasia. Thank you. In the interest of time, I'm going to give the floor to Adam.
Thank you very much, and thank you for so inspiring presentations. I'd like to ask and address this to you first, Kasia. It's a fellow, a UFEM fellow in one of the field epidemiology training programs and public health microbiology training programs here in Europe, who is then asking, and coming back to what I brought up in the beginning, that the fellows have had a very challenging situation as well, but reflecting on how do we use and adapt the way we train. So basically the question is then, fellows within the FETP programs have also experienced mental health struggles during COVID, and this showed the lack of soft skills in this area. How should field epidemiology training programs curriculum adapt to include skills that target mental health and general well-being in the future public health workforce?
Maybe
so,
oh, sorry.
Yeah, so we'll start with Kasia, since we were talking about the curriculum and you worked with competency frameworks, etc. So a bit interested to hear you out there first, and then we'll go on to the question.
Thank you very much for this question, and that's really very relevant. And also from my own experience, because we have a full-blown public health leadership program for the students at Maastricht University. There is a program of governance and leadership in European public health. And during the pandemic, yes, this program, we paid special attention to building the competencies around leadership, self-management, empathy, emotional intelligence, and the meaning of values and interpersonal relations. So we have special tools based on competencies where the students, together with the mentors, can discuss and find out what they have to do. But we were doing that in pairs, so that there were always two students or two fellows, because that's on different levels, right? Not only undergraduate, but postgraduate as well, where they could meet outside. And as I was saying, that this blend of scientific and empathy is so important. There were meetings online, and we were teaching online, and they were always very apprehensive and listening what I will tell. And then I asked them once, "What do you want me to say?" And they started sending hearts, you know, and saying, "Just tell us that you love us." And that was so special and so touching, so that we shouldn't be afraid to talk about emotions, and that we should be able to understand the emotions that people are in and act upon them, showing the understanding. And of course, using the tools of the competency development, because there are a lot of things that each individual needs, and we should be there for them and happy to support. So there are many competency self-assessment tools, but with careful understanding, empathy, and as I said before, that framework, compassionate leadership. Thank you
very much, Kasia. And over to you, Giorgio. I also think maybe you can address this perspective.
And I just showed Giorgio the comment that said, could Giorgio do a recording of his full talk to be shared later somehow? I was finding it so helpful hearing him describe the symptoms and this.
Thank you.
We have to make, can you do that? We'll find a way.
We'll talk about it, yeah.
He's here, so.
I'm here. We have to contact some relevant director, I don't know.
Or just I would suggest
Coppola.
maybe, I mean, there's ECDC and then there's the EPIET Alumni network. They're really good.
Okay. I was thinking about Scorsese or something. Right, but in order to answer the question, I love the notion of compassionate leadership. Thank you, Cassie. And as individuals, irrespective of whether we're working within the public health force or not, I mean, stress is everywhere, right? We live in a radically different way today than 100 years ago. We were stressed then, but we're stressed now for other reasons. So, irrespective of where you work, you have to learn the fine art of, working efficiently in the sense that you do one thing at a time instead of multitasking. Not 100% of the time, because that's impossible, but, work towards that end. Do one thing at a time with your full concentration, if possible, right? And then you have to what you've heard before, it's really not much glamour in this, but
there's no quick fix.
There's no quick fix, but this taking break things and the recovery issue, what is that? Many people believe that when they have to take a break, they need to remain seated and maybe turn around a bit from the computer and pick up the mobile phone and start, I don't know, letting your brain rest. And it doesn't work that way. So if you work a lot with your mind, which we tend to do today, we are chronically, cognitively overexerted, we need to find ways to let the brain rest on a daily basis, several times a day, okay? And that won't work by sitting down and using the mobile phone. You have to, move, stand up, take your breaks, do some singing, do some yoga, do some dancing, throw it away. Or whatever you fancy that allows your mind to rest. And then you have the emotional aspect of work, which also deserves its particular type of recovery. So if you find your ways of alternating between physical exertion, mental, emotional, and find your ways of sleeping properly at night and have a life outside of work, which is fairly fulfilling and reasonably fun and so, then experience says that you'll be all right. Yes, I see that you want to talk.
No, it may seem like I want to talk, but actually
Have you seen her shoes? They're brilliant.
Shout out to my husband who said he would log on. I'm not sure if it's been a long session. And he said, don't take those boots to Madrid. It's way too warm. I said, I'm going to wear them on stage. And I did. Actually, I don't want to talk. I want to let other people talk. And I see the red clock. That's the point. And now is the time, I think, to let Jackie, you're so great at summarizing. And I can see that there's so many good questions here. And I don't know if that means that we can have an extra half an hour.
Unfortunately not, but I can sort of encapsulate them a little bit for you, because it linked a little bit to that question about hypervigilance, post-pandemic, expectations being the same. There's also somebody saying, I try to be an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. I try to encourage people to take the breaks, to work less, but they're still doing it. And they said that's because it's become, not just because of the workload, but it's become institutionalized. How do we break that cycle? And then there was a question about how to help colleagues who have burnout, someone who admits they've got it, but does nothing about it. Is there anything we can do to help them? And to Lucy, there were questions basically about what can each of us do to cope with this trauma, not just what support do we need, and there were questions about how long should that support last. A lot of the peer support services stopped after the pandemic. How long do we have a right to ask for support? But what can each of us do to cope with the trauma and not be part of the exodus? So they're all around very practical. What can we do as individuals to help?
I think that's excellent. I see the clock. It says 4 minutes and 40 seconds. I suggest that we're democratic. Everyone gets 1 minute each, including Adam and I, to wrap up. And Giorgio, you'll be first.
Okay. I'm going back to my computer. And no, the presentation is gone, so what am I doing here? Well, actually, yesterday at the bar camp, I heard something very helpful, and that is, approaching each other and asking, are you okay?
Exactly.
And it's okay to say, no, I'm not. Yeah. And that's really not something
It was Charlotte from the EIN board who mentioned that, and I think we can take a few seconds to just elaborate on that. Go to a colleague. And also when people say, how are you doing? And some of us say, I'm fine, I'm great, I'm super. I have a very good friend who told me the other day here at the conference, actually, he might be here in the room, who said, when people tell me they're great, they're fantastic, now he just says, it's okay if you don't want to talk about it. I mean, I don't know anyone who is, I'm fine, I'm great, I'm perfect. And so let us help each other be that person where you can share and be open. That was 1 minute. That means there's 1 minute to Lucy. You can do it.
30 seconds. 30 seconds is for Stine. No.
This is really stressful.
I spent my minute. My minute is gone.
No pressure. Yeah. By When the Dust Settles by Lucy Easthope, because that's exactly what I talk about. It's like what next, but also recognizing that this is about what you can do.
Kasia, your minute.
And I would suggest, because someone said how to make it stick, how to institutionalize this change. Because if you want to tell people just take more time, do something else outside the work, but they don't do, maybe introduce a project that is based on the leading change accelerators. According to Kotter, there are specific areas. First, build a guiding coalition, formulate your strategic goal, communicate it among the people, produce some kind of visible achievements that people can see, oh, it works, and celebrate it. And then keep on learning and institutionalize it. So introduce it in the organization. Don't forget about any of these steps. Otherwise, it doesn't work. Thank you.
Adam, that leaves us with 2 minutes.
You get the first one.
I get the first one? Good, you get the last one. I'm not going to spend out of mine, so I'm not the person that wants to talk so much. I'll give you more than 1 minute. I will, because the only thing that I'm going to end with is at 12:30 today, there is, for those of you, I'm sorry to those of you being at home, the Follow the Science, Follow the Song session is only for people at the conference. So for those of you online, we'll have to do that recording of Giorgio's talk, and that will be for you and everyone. But for those of you here who felt that this was a good session, I just want to recommend you to go to the song session. It's not about whether you can sing or not. I went and I cannot sing, and Georgia does a really good part about leading us through it. We were singing one day at a time. One day at a time. Something like that. Go to the session and you'll figure it out. You have your minute.
Looking very much forward to that. So I'd just like to thank all of the fantastic speakers who came here today, Lucy, Kasia, Giorgio. I'd like to thank Stine as well, and our great support, not only in the room, but outside the room, and all our testimonials. Thank you very much for contributing. And what I bring with me from this, it's a lot, but to summarize, I would say, name a crisis for what it is, and don't be afraid to do that. Be a compassionate leader, be strong through being vulnerable. And don't be afraid to talk about emotions. And take a break, take a sing. And thank you all. Have a great day.